All right, we have a great friend of the family and a great friend of the Family Research Council and one who's not a stranger to the airwaves here at AFR, Congressman Louie Gohmert, who represents the 1st Congressional District of Texas. And one of the reasons, Tim, I wanted to have Louie on is that the speech this week of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was prompted by an invitation of Congressman Louie Gohmert to have the Prime Minister come and speak to a joint session of Congress. So, Congressman Gohmert, welcome to today's Issues, the Washington Watch edition with Tim Wildmon and Tony Perkins.
Well, thank you so much. The invitation actually has to come from the Speaker and the Majority Leader in the House, but I had been pushing for this for a year, going back to when, for the first time in history, the United States voted with Israel's enemies to require them to disclose all of their nuclear weaponry. And so it didn't surprise me that right after that, here came the flotilla to challenge the Israeli blockade, trying to prevent nothing but weapons from exclude nothing but weapons from going into the Gaza Strip, because they've had 12,000 rockets fired at them. And anyway, you go through history, you see every time the enemies of a nation see that nation's strongest ally start distancing itself, that's when they move. And so it occurred to me that we needed to have a show to the world, especially Israel's enemies, that here in Congress, we will fuss, will really go after each other, disagree strongly on different issues, but when it comes to Israel, both sides of the aisle will stand and applaud and stand with Israel, because the world was getting the impression that this administration representing the U.S. just was doing nothing but snub Israel, snub Netanyahu. And so I tried to put together a letter, or I did put together a letter, and I was getting Republican members to sign on. That wasn't a problem, but I really, because Speaker Pelosi was Speaker and she'd have to be the one to invite him, I tried to get a number of strong Democratic supporters of Israel, and they were uncomfortable. Shelley Berkeley was willing to sign on, but I realized that without a strong Democratic support of the letter requesting he be invited as a guest to a joint session of Congress to speak to us, that it wouldn't work. So I just approached Speaker Pelosi on the floor a year ago and had said, look, I know we disagree on so many political issues, but I know you support Israel, and the world needs to see, Israel's enemies need to see both sides of the aisle standing applauding. And I said, as far as politics, this might even help your party, because it'll show how strongly they do stand with Israel, because some people are wondering about it. And, she was very gracious. It's a wonderful idea. I really like it. But, here we are, we're basically June, and we just don't have the time to work that in. It's a great idea. Just can't work it in. So anyway, I kept pushing behind the scenes and nothing happened, and then we took the majority, and I got a letter, and since signed by around 60 of our Republican guys, I didn't go to the Democrats because we have a Republican speaker, and I knew that if we got the right people on that it would be pretty persuasive. And as much as I've been upset with our speaker about some issues that he had negotiated, I'm telling you what, he stepped up. He made the invitation to Netanyahu, and Harry Reid came along after Boehner jumped on that, and so we had him there. And I'm telling you what, it was God's timing. If Netanyahu had come a year ago when I was first pushing this, the timing would have not been nearly as important as it is right now. Don't you think?
Absolutely. We're talking to Congressman Louie Gohmert about Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel's appearance before the joint session of Congress on, was that Monday or Tuesday?
That was Tuesday.
Tuesday.
Mm-hmm.
And Representative Gohmert had been, working at this for a long time to get this to happen, and it finally did happen. And
it was. Didn't he do a great job?
Man, I've got some clips. How long can you stay with us, Congressman? Because I got some clips.
As long as you want.
All right, Tony. I've got just some short clips here, like a minute, and then 40 minute clip. And got a couple of these. You want to play these now from the speech?
But I
go right ahead.
set that up as he was coming down the aisle, and when he got to me, I shook his hand and I said, Prime Minister, I've been pushing to get you invited for a year now, so don't screw this up. And he said,
"You told the Prime Minister don't screw this up."
Yeah, well, he's got a great sense of humor. I mean, if you've been around him, we've kidded.
Yeah.
And I said, "So don't screw this up, okay?" He said, "I'm not going to screw this up." Anyway, then I said, "Well, keep in mind the whole time you're giving this speech that our national motto will be above your head." And I pointed, and in God we trust. And he said, "I'd already thought about that."
Amen.
Yeah.
Let's play clip number 6 here. Benjamin Netanyahu's speech before Congress.
The millions who poured into the streets of Tehran, Tunis, Cairo, Sana'a, Benghazi, Damascus, they're not thinking about Israel. They're thinking of freedom. They're yearning for opportunity. They're yearning for hope for themselves and for their children. So it's time to stop blaming Israel for all the region's problems. Let me stress one thing. Peace between Israelis and Palestinians is a vital interest for us. It would be the realization of a powerful and eternal dream. But it is not a panacea for the endemic problems of the Middle East. It will not give women in some Arab countries the right to drive a car. It will not prevent churches from being bombed. It will not keep journalists out of jail. What will change this? One word: democracy. Real, genuine democracy.
Okay, that was from IPAC speech by Netanyahu, not the congressional speech. Have another clip. Play the next clip, Rob.
And by democracy, I don't just mean elections. I mean freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of assembly, the rights for women, for gays, for minorities, for everyone. What the people of Israel want is for the people of the Middle East to have what you have in America, what we have in Israel, democracy. So it's time to recognize this basic truth. Israel is not what's wrong with the Middle East. Israel is what's right about the Middle East.
And the last clip. Play the last clip, then we'll come back and talk about it.
Then it's time that we admitted another truth. This conflict has raged for nearly a century because the Palestinians refused to end it. They refused to accept the Jewish state. Now, this is what this conflict has always been about. There are many issues linked to this conflict that must be resolved between Israelis and Palestinians. We must resolve them. But I repeat, we can only make peace with the Palestinians if they're prepared to make peace with the Jewish state. Tomorrow in Congress, I'll describe what a peace between a Palestinian state and the Jewish state could look like. But I want to assure you of one thing. It must leave Israel with security, and therefore Israel cannot return to the indefensible 1967 lines.
All right, that was Prime Minister of Israel Benjamin Netanyahu before the IPAC, which is an Israeli support organization. That was Monday night. And my apologies, I thought those clips were from the. But the similar type things. Congressman Louie Gohmert is with us. Those were similar type things. What he said.
Yeah, it's just even more powerful.
Yeah.
And let me tell you how refreshing it was to have a nation's leader standing up, looking everyone in the eye, not making it look like they're looking you in the eye because of the placement of the teleprompter. There was no teleprompter in the
really?
Congressional chamber. There was no teleprompter. He had a notebook with notes of the speech. He turned pages, but he rarely looked down at it. And it was just so refreshing to have a leader look us in the eye. He was very comfortable, but he was truly a leader as he spoke. Just very impressive.
Tony, what'd you think?
Well, I thought it was extremely powerful. But here's, from a political standpoint, the president was marching into a no-win situation. And we talked about this, Brian and I talked about this on Tuesday, that I don't think the president was hoping to gain any kind of political opportunity here. I think this is he's driven by ideology, and that's what drove him to this. But I was very interested to see the outcome, and it was exactly what I thought it would be when he made a remarkable speech. But what I was looking for is the reaction. And what happened is what Congressman Gohmert talked about earlier, a few minutes ago, is that actually supporting Israel is one of those bipartisan efforts, one of those rare bipartisan things in Congress. And so what happened is the president actually drove a wedge between himself and his party after Benjamin Netanyahu spoke on Tuesday by forcing this issue of them withdrawing back to the 67 borders. He's by himself on this. So the president has put himself into an interesting position.
But Tony, I agree with you on anything you say, but I wouldn't say in this case that was a no-win for the president, because if he had been as hospitable to Benjamin Netanyahu as he was to the Chinese premier who had the Nobel Peace Prize winner in jail, as he has been to all of these other leaders, including when he's met with Chavez, if he had been as gracious to him and had not tried to upstage him, basically, and set forth his ideology while Netanyahu was flying over, I think it could have been a huge win for the president. No,
I agree with that. I mean, he could have used it to his political advantage had he
been gracious.
Yes, exactly, like you should to any foreign leader, especially our only ally in the Middle East. But the point I was making is that it made no political sense for the president to insult the prime minister and the whole nation of Israel the day before they met to make this speech at the State Department saying Israel needs to give away Jerusalem, and they need to give away land and go back to the 67 borders. My point on that was saying that makes no political sense. It's driven by pure ideology that is dangerous to national security, and I think dangerous to the long-term friendship that we've enjoyed with Israel, that Christians in this country have supported and promoted.
Yeah, absolutely. But as the president has pointed out, we have a diverse group of 57 states in this country, and so I don't know. There may be states out there that he was trying to play to that I'm not aware of.
Yeah, there are two major.
It's kind of hard, Tim, and radio. That we need a little subtext, sarcasm there.
Sarcasm. I got it.
We've got.
I have such a face for radio, though. I prefer this.
We got people out there going to the internet trying 57 states. Did something happen this week? What happened?
Well, if the people don't know, he said that at one time. That we have 57. I've been to all 57 states. And actually, there are 57 Muslim states, but that's a whole other issue.
Well, another thing he said, and President Obama were talking about, by the way, folks, you're listening to the Washington Watch edition of Today's Issues here every Tuesday and Thursday. Tony Perkins is in our nation's capital where the FRC headquarters and studios are. And I'm at the studios of American Family Radio, Tim Wildmon here, and our guest this half hour is Congressman Louie Gohmert from Texas. We're talking about Benjamin Netanyahu's speech, the Prime Minister of Israel, Tuesday before joint session of Congress. And if you haven't watched it, you need to go on the internet and watch it in its entirety. It's extremely powerful speech, as Tony and Congressman Gohmert have said. But, talking about a slip of the tongue, so to speak, of President Obama when he was a candidate, he, in addition to saying there are 57 states, and, when you're tired and you're running around the country campaigning, anybody can make a mistake in speech. We understand that. But then he also slipped with George Stephanopoulos you may remember this when he was on with him, and he said, talking about my Muslim faith. And then you talk about feeding into something.
Oh,
and then George Stephanopoulos had to come back and say, "You mean your Christian faith?" And he said, "Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I mean my Christian faith."
Yeah,
but I've never in my life, and I'm not saying he's a Muslim. I'm just saying that 20% of Americans think President Obama is a Muslim, and it doesn't help his cause when he says my Muslim faith.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Could give you a little trivia. From a few years ago, we had a clerk retire, and I asked him what was the most memorable thing he remembered happening in the chamber. He said Bill Clinton was giving a State of the Union address, and it wasn't the first one, and he started the speech, and he got a number of applause lines, and then during one of the big applause lines, he turned around, and so the cameras could not pick up what he said with his, by reading his lips. And he said, so out the side of his mouth, because Stephanopoulos was right down at the bottom of the dais, and said it so George could hear. He said, "They got the wrong speech on the teleprompter." And he said Stephanopoulos took off out the chamber through the side door where they had the laptop that was controlling the teleprompter, and they eject the DVD or the CD, and it was the previous year's State of the Union address. And
you're not
Clinton
serious.
had practiced enough. He was out there winging it and was getting good applause lines, and the clerk said nobody knew, that he was out there winging it, that he had the prior year's, he was just pretty flexible in front of a group.
You mean the State of the Union address?
That was the State of the Union address.
The White House staff brought the wrong CD over to the...
Well, some things never change. Just let's put a few new jokes in there, and we can use it.
Yeah, well, I guess that proves we all put our pants legs on one at a time. If the White House can... I don't know. Hey, I wanted to ask you real quickly, Congressman. I know you've speaking of President Bill Clinton, I was kind of surprised to read this yesterday. He was commenting on his own party, the Democrats, about Medicare, and he said this. He was talking about. Hold on just one second here. Let me quote him verbatim. This is President Bill Clinton to the New York Times, and this is about Medicare, and he said, I quote, "I think the Democrats are going to have to be willing to give up maybe some short-term political gain by whipping up fears on some of these things," end of quote. Well, that's not the end of the quote. He says, "If it's a reasonable Social Security proposal, a reasonable Medicare proposal, we've got to deal with these things. You cannot have health care devour the economy," end of quote. I found it very interesting that the president, President Clinton, would talk to his own party like, don't be whipping up these false fears about Medicare. This is something serious we need to talk about.
Well, I was thinking he also said they needed to be more gracious to Israel, something like that.
Well, he may have said that too,
yeah.
And
can I throw something in, because this needs to be a matter of prayer. Everybody.
Hey, we got to go to Louie. We got to go to a break. Can you stay around for 5 minutes on the other side of the break? Because I want to ask you about an important vote that's coming up today that people need to know about.
Yeah. Okay. And Congressman Louie Gohmert on with us, Tony and Tim here. You're listening to the Washington Watch. Today's issues edition of Washington Watch, or vice versa, whatever. I'm confused there. I've got the wrong speech.
Folks, you need to change Tim's teleprompter.
Yeah, change my teleprompter. We'll be back after this break. Stay with us. Welcome back, everybody. We do have some breaking news here. I was checking the Fox News website, and the Supreme Court, according to Fox News, has sustained Arizona's law that penalizes businesses for hiring workers who are in the United States illegally, rejecting arguments that states have no role in immigration matters. By a 5-3 vote, the Supreme Court said Thursday that federal immigration law gives states the authority to impose sanctions on employers who hire unauthorized workers. Joining us this half hour, I'm Tim Wildmon, along with Tony Perkins, and Congressman Louie Gohmert from Texas is still phone with us.
You bet.
Tony, you wanted to ask the congressman something about a vote.
Well, yes, there's an important vote coming up today. They've been debating it for the last almost 36 hours, and it's the defense authorization bill. And why this is important, not only does this provide funding and direction for our troops, but because of some developments as a result of the president's attempt to overturn, or successful attempt, at least it's in the process, hasn't been accomplished yet, to overturn the prohibition against open homosexuality in the military. It came down a few weeks ago from the chief of the Navy that chaplains had to start doing same-sex marriages on military bases in jurisdictions that allow same-sex marriage. And so there was a couple of amendments added to the Defense Authorization Bill. One is a Military Defensive Marriage Act. There was also a measure by Duncan Hunter that was added that would allow the service chiefs to be able to weigh in on issues on the whether or not the military is ready to have to support open homosexuality. So I just wanted to get Congressman Gohmert's take on that. Is that coming to a floor vote this afternoon, and what folks might still be able to do?
Well, it should be coming to a vote. I think. It'll either be here shortly, possibly in the next 5 or 10 minutes. We'll be voting on amendments. And I'm not sure if that will be in this first wave or it will be in the second wave we'll vote on this afternoon. But any listeners, please call your member of Congress and encourage them to take a stand on this. Look, when I was in the Army for 4 years, if anybody was overt with their sexuality, whether it was having affairs, whether it was people acting out homosexually, it was a distraction to the good order and discipline of the military, and anything that is a distraction from the good order and discipline from the military has no place in the military. They're about protecting America. And so, and actually, the Navy chaplain were supposed to be allowed to do that, and actually a bunch of us sent a letter and said to the Defense Department that this is completely inappropriate. DOMA is the law of the land, and so they backed off and then announced the chaplains in the Navy would not be doing that, and that came after we put open pressure. But since they could announce at any time they would or wouldn't, we felt like there needed to be a law that just says you follow the law of the land, and that's the Defense of Marriage Act. So hopefully the amendment will pass, but then it's got to pass 2 houses down in the Senate as well. But we need to make that statement and make it clear, and it will be very helpful if we get that amendment passed today.
Congressman, I just got a message just a little bit before I came on there. I was over at Fox News doing an interview on transgender clownfish are being taught in the classroom to young elementary school kids about how transgenderism is okay, and Tim and I may talk about that in a minute. But I haven't had a chance to check this out, but I got a message from someone who is in the military, and they said that they were just given a briefing on the whole issue of the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And they were told that those members of the military that are openly homosexual will not be deployed to Muslim countries, which, again, I haven't had a chance to verify this, but if that's the case, I mean, that flies in the face of the whole justification that the president used in passing this through.
Does. Yeah,
so I hope to be able to find out.
Such an incredible distraction, and I had not heard that, and I'm glad you mentioned it because I sure want to follow up with that. Because obviously, anything that diminishes the ability of the military to protect this nation and its vital interests should not be part of the military. That's just the way it is. We had, when I was at Fort Benning, we had one private that thought a wink and a nod from another guy, and his basic course was come on, and to his surprise, when he crawled in the bunk of the other private, he did not intend and did not appreciate having him crawl in the bunk with him. those kind of things are not helpful in the military. They're a distraction, and it sure needed a lot more thought than it got.
It sure did. Well, Congressman Gohmert, thank you for sticking around and joining us in the second half. But thanks for your leadership in Congress. We appreciate all that you do.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right, Congressman, we'll
Thank
talk to you
y'all.
later. Appreciate it.